one of the few researchers I've ever read who's very ethical. He says if it's not a win-win, you cannot do it. And it really guides everything that I'm trying to teach people how to do. How can you ethically get people to jump on your boat and enjoy the ride together?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. Very excited for this week's guest, Mr. Danny Brassell. Danny, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Phil. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of your positivity.
We're trying. And Dan, we were talking before the show. He's coming to Lima, Ohio here in a couple of weeks. So for our listeners that are local here, maybe come check him out. What school did you say you're going to? I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Lima Senior High, speaking to the entire district on March 14th.
That's awesome. So Lima Senior, but coming local. So we appreciate that. So first about Danny a little bit. He is a speaker, has spoken to 3,500 different audiences, an author, wrote 16 different books. That is focus, commitment, good work on that, Coach. And, I like just the tagline. We talked about leadership too a little bit, and I just love the topic of leadership, but helping leaders rediscover joy in work and in education. And you support businesses and schools, public school system, like you just talked about a lot. So I want to get into both of those topics over the course of our discussion. But before we do, how did this all come about, Danny? How did you get here? Tell me a little bit about your story.
For years, people had asked me to coach them on speaking, and I always resisted because I've always had a high standard for my students. I keep people accountable, and I want them to succeed. But I found really my niche. I love working with entrepreneurs. These are self-motivated people that really want to grow, and I've had so much fun. Created a company with my friend Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson called the Well-Crafted Story Workshop, and now we help individuals, entrepreneurs, and organizations leverage speaking on stages as a major client lead source that converts.
You hit a lot. I want to dig into some of those. So first, let's just start. Let's go to family first. Then let's come back to business. So I want to talk about reading.
Family first.
So reading, and I got 5 kids, ages 14 to 6, and I think they are enjoying reading. But like lifelong education, I think, is such a key element of success for anybody. And there's different ways to do that. I think you can read, you can write, you can listen to podcasts, you can pray, you can sit in silence. There's a lot of ways to build your mindset. You can network and associate with others, but reading is, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. There's so much importance to this. And if we can get that ingrained in our children and help them understand why and to love it, I think that's really impactful. So I want to hear how we can do that.
Well, really, you start with their interests. This is the biggest mistake I see. In high school, I was assigned to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And no offense to the Hawthorne fans out there listening right now, but the story is about Hester Prynne commits adultery, and so she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand in class one day and I asked the teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. I'm gonna say this. I can say this because I'm a PhD to everybody out there. The research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. I mean, here's a little strategy I share with parents all the time. The little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. So if there's one little strategy I would share with everybody out there is find out what your kids are interested in, find out what you're interested in. I find this in adults too. I watched this horrible show on TV last week called The News, and it totally put me in a bad mood because it's just about all the failures of society. I think people, you are what you read, so read good stuff. And so again, the the roundabout way to get to the answer of your question is I expose my kids to all kinds of things by reading aloud to them. You know, it doesn't have to be anything too long, 5 to 10 minutes, but I'll read interesting anecdotes, stories. I love just little stories. I constantly, my kids probably are sick of them, but I just think that they need to be exposed to a lot of these positive things. And, you know, most of society is always focused on the negative things. No wonder. I mean, it's really one of my companies is Lazy Reader. I have one of the top book clubs online, lazyreaders.com, where every month I give 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you can read something, you have something to read when you're stuck in a boring meeting. The reason I created that, Phil, was because I was in Barnes and Noble one day looking at the young adult section, and all of the books were about date rape and teen suicide and dystopian society. And I'm like, no wonder teenagers are screwed up. If this is what they're reading, why don't you give them something positive? I mean, I saw that movie. What? Gosh, I'm getting old. I forget. I used to know things, but I can't remember the name of the movie where it's the African American women who helped the space program. Hidden Figures. That's the name of the movie. I watched that with my daughters, and I'm like, what a beautiful movie. There's no cursing. Nobody's getting raped. You know, it's a positive. And then we read the book together afterwards. I'm like, you know, people need to see the possibilities. We flood people with all the negativity in the world. So again, I'm sorry, I get off on this stuff.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think I have three things I thought about there. First of all, with kids, so I asked the question like, when do you start to influence it? You really, their interests are going to change over time, and just let them like adapt to that. And when you find out what their new interests are, bring in different books that are positive. I think that was the big thing too. Is like, yeah, like watch what they're reading so it's not completely negative and total garbage. You're not saying that, let them do whatever they want. But as their interests change to business or finance or leadership or just sales, which we'll come back to here in a little bit, they'll start to read that, and reading will be the habit that will make them a better person. So I really like that. The other thing is, um, the importance of that is what they're interested in, but also positive is you said you are what you read. And I've heard the
Mhm.
quote too, but like pay attention to what you pay attention to. We're feeding our minds all the time. So if you know, independent of the topic, if it's a positive book that we're taking in good information versus if it's a garbage TV show or whatever it might be. So just pay attention to what you pay attention to, or you are what you read. I really like that. And I want to take that and transition to speaking a little bit, and just not just speaking like, I can imagine people are thinking, oh, well, I'm not a public speaker. That's not me. But the bigger theme here, I think, is we're all in sales in some different way. We're all selling, whether we're selling ourselves at a career, we're selling, all my employees are interacting with residents. So they're selling our, like what we do, or our properties. If we're talking to investors, like if we're talking to contractors, we want to get their priority. If we're talking to real estate agents, if we're talking to other business owners, we want them to give us more priority. So we're always selling something. Whether that's, we don't want to come across that we're selling something, I guess, but selling something or sales, communication, speaking, so important. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. Um, Talk me through, let's start with more of a basic, either elevator pitch or some like a simple sales example, maybe of like what are some key things we should be thinking about here, I guess.
Great. So, Coach Jimmy and I, we take people through, and we've worked with lots of famous speakers, in entertainment industry, politics, all kinds of things. But most of the people we work with are exactly your audience, entrepreneurs that they've never even thought about speaking, or they're terrified about speaking. And we just have to show them a simple process. Basically, we're showing you a formula that you use this formula, and it's going to increase your rate of return. And so, we call there's nothing new under the sun. Everybody has just different names for their processes. So we call it the 5 C's process. And so if you remember these 5 C's, you're doing a good job of creating a well-crafted story. So the first one is clarity. And this is the most important one, because it's amazing how probably 95% of the people we work with just don't have clarity. There's 2 questions you have to ask yourself. Who is my audience? And what is the problem that I solve? Now, we were working with a gentleman the other day. I said, well, who is your audience? He says, well, I work with primarily with men between 30 and 50. Well, we also have women, and well, they come from all over. And I'm like, you don't know who your audience is until
Right.
you're very clear, niche it down. And you can always expand it, but you want to niche it down. The riches are in
Yep.
the niches. And then the second question you have to ask yourself is, what is the problem you solve? I hear people say, well, well, we help real estate agents sell their houses, but we all, and we help them with list. I mean, you're being very unclear. You need to practice this all the time. I mean, most of the people I know, they waste their times on social media while they're on their phones.
Yep.
I have all kinds of reminders that I get throughout the day practicing different pitches that I'm doing. Like right now, I've been practicing a new mission statement and vision statement. I'm trying to learn that. I'm a bad Christian. I'm trying to learn verses from the Bible. So, like every day at 2:17, I'm doing Proverbs 27:17, which is as iron sharpens iron, so a friend
Love
sharpens.
it. Love that quote.
I got married on December 20th. So every day I have a reminder at 12:20 to remind myself to tell my wife I love her. This is how stuff gets done. People are like, that's
Yeah.
unromantic. I'm like, it's actually very romantic because it gets done because I have it on my phone
Yeah.
all the time. And so clarity is the most important thing. Once you have clarity, then we can actually start digging into how to create your presentation. So you start with connection. And so here's my best strategy for everybody listening there. Stop talking about your successes, start talking about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you talk about your own failures, they're going to love you because they're going to relate better to you. I'll give you an example. We were working with a financial planner a few months ago, Richard. Richard's very successful, and he used to start his presentations out. He'd say, I've been working in the industry for 30 years. I've made my clients over $1 billion. I've worked with this famous person and this famous person. I said, Richard, what are the three most important aspects of real estate? He said, what? I'm like, location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation. And so we redid his presentation. So now he starts off by talking about the very first client he got, which is basically a comedy of errors. He did everything wrong. It's amazing that this person ever signed with him. And this was the thing, Phil, this was really important. So the way Richard gets clients is every week he does one or two of these dinners at like steakhouses for about 15 couples to get them to invest their retirement savings with him. And he said that he's always noticed that the couple, usually the guy has his arms across his chest, like, how much is this going to cost me? What's this going to take? Things like
I
that.
know better than you do. Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Well, now that he's changed his story to talking about all of his the stupid things he did at getting his first client, now he said the first time he gave this speech the new way, he's watching the guys, and the guys now are patting their knees and laughing hysterically.
Right.
And he said that he used to get on average about 6 of the 15 couples to schedule an appointment with him. Now that he's changed the story, he gets 12. He doubled it. Now I have to say
Yeah.
your results may vary, but
Right. Right.
but I was like, there you go. It's because you're making yourself vulnerable. Brene Brown, wonderful speaker, she talks about vulnerability. Her book, Dare to Dream. Everybody should read that. Dare to Lead, Dare to Dream. No, it's Dare to Lead, Dare to Lead. But she talks about being vulnerable. I mean, I go for it, Phil.
I just think this one connection. So clarity first, then connection, and talk about failures. Everyone has failed. It's relatable. So from a sales perspective, but also look for you personally to do that. It's healthy. Like it just look, we're all human. We all have failed so many times. It's just being vulnerable, being authentic. That just feels better. It will calm you down once you talk about things. If you like, so just put down your guard a little bit and talk about it. By the way, when you do it, now you're also getting closer to having a successful sale in whatever you're doing. But even if you don't do it for that reason, it's out there then. And like you don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think it's also not just an approach to sales, it's just a healthy thing to do. So I'll let you keep going. I just wanted to add that
No,
context.
and you're right. When you were talking about everything is sales, that's what I say all the time too. I mean, Jesus was the greatest salesperson. I mean,
Hmm.
he's got followers all over the place. This works with your children, by the way. Your kids need to figure out that you weren't perfect, that you've made
Right.
mistakes throughout your life, that
Agreed.
you have those trials and tribulations. When they start
Yes.
seeing that, that's really important for them to discover that. So,
Hmm.
and I think And Jimmy and I really do this with people. I think the problem a lot of people think about is they think of sales. And so let's get rid of that word altogether and start thinking service. I've actually never liked the term servant leadership because leadership, by definition, a good leader should be serving. You know, and I'm sorry I keep on going to Jesus, but Jesus always said that the best leaders were the ones that served. They
Yep.
did the low things for the higher people. So
Yep.
when you come from a service mindset, I mean, when I'm talking to people, basically the way I'm looking at my audience is they're dying and I have the antidote. And if they don't take the antidote, they're
Right.
going to die. If you
Yeah.
start looking at it that way, it gives you a different motivation as opposed to, hey, buy my product or subscribe to my podcast. So
Yes. I
yeah,
like
we
that.
did.
I do agree with
Yeah.
that.
So we did the first two C's, which are clarity and connection. The next C is actually the least important, ironically. It's content. And content, the reason this is ironic is this is usually the largest part of your presentation, but the least important. Now, most people, they screw up the content of their presentation. And this is one of the things that Jimmy and I are showing people is, you know, you shouldn't overteach, you shouldn't underteach, but what you do need to show your audience is that you're helpful. So we believe that you need to have a short-term solution for your audience to prove to them that they can do it, but you also need to provide a long-term solution which shows them they can do it. I call it the Home Depot. You can do it, we can help.
I like
When
that.
I'm showing people, hey, I can help you make this speech a lot stronger. I mean, this is what I do all the time. Just like if I need real estate advice, I'm going to you, Phil, because that's your expertise. I'm a big believer in, you know, coaches. I've always hired lots of coaches. I mean, you look at Tiger Woods, greatest golfer in the world. Always hired coaches. I mean, he had a putting coach. He has a short game coach. He has a long distance coach. He has a mental coach. Maybe he should have hired a relationship coach. Okay, so that's content. And the reason
Yep.
content's not that important, there's actually a lot of research on this. And that's what I always call Jimmy and I the professor and the poet because he comes from a Broadway background and I come from an education academic background. And so I don't believe in giving opinions. I believe in giving answers based on research.
Yeah.
And the research shows us that the bun's more important than the burger. People remember the beginning of your presentation and the end of your presentation. They don't remember anything you taught them, but what they do remember is if you're helpful. And we show people ways to be helpful throughout their presentation. The next C is your call to action. Your call to action, and basically the call to action also relates to the fifth C, which is the close. Call to action in your close. So it's
Yep.
C's number 4 and 5. Now, here's the thing that we see is a problem in most presentations is you have to understand that there's two types of people in your audience. And so I'm going to be stereotypical and say the man and the woman, the husband and the wife. So the husband is what I always call the Joe Friday. Joe Friday is interested in just the facts. How much is this going to cost? How long is it going to take? What are you going to do for me? It's very important that in your call to action, you provide those answers to satisfy that person. Biggest mistake most people make is they only create a presentation that satisfies part of their audience. The other part of the audience, we'll call it the wife, is what I call the Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts, she makes decisions based on emotion. I don't care what this is. I just want it to make me feel good. Does it make me feel good? And so that's why the best presentations, they end with something inspiring. I mean, I learned this format when I was in 7th grade with Miss Eskridge at Miller Junior High. Miss Eskridge, she called it your 4 I's. She said you have to have an introduction, you have to have instruction, you have to have an invitation, and then you have to have inspiration. So she had the 4 I's, I call it the 5 C's.
Yeah.
But you have to end addressing the needs of both of those people in your audience. And when you do that, you dramatically increase the number of people to take the next step. Now, the biggest mistake most people make, and you might even make this mistake, Phil. I was actually just on a podcast yesterday talking to a guy, and here's his mistake. At the end of his podcast, he's, hey, if you like this podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and write a comment. I'm like, well, you just gave your audience 3 choices, which means they're going to do none of them. You got to give your audience one. Choices confuse and cause you to lose. Don't give them choices. Give them one call to action. The biggest mistake.
Guilty.
I see it all the time. I mean,
what's
you
the
don't
most
see like,
impactful
yes,
of
I mean,
those?
yeah, you don't see a politician saying, vote for me. Also, I need you to donate and I need you to subscribe. No, their speeches, if they're crafted properly, it's either if they're at a fundraising dinner, they're asking not for the vote, they're asking for the donation. If
Right.
they're at a rally for voters, they're asking for the vote. They're only asking for one thing. And if you watch, I mean, I always like to poke fun because humor is one of the things I'm good at, is adding humor to presentations. Is, have you ever seen a presidential candidate who grew up middle class? No, they all grew up in poverty. Oh, I was poor. I grew up in a log. They always have to relate to people that way. And I have no problem with that. This is something that definitely separates Jimmy and I from other people that teach people how to speak. I mean, a lot of people out there, they're teaching you to tell your saddest story, your most dramatic story. There's three reasons why I don't do that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need another sad story. I think we need more stories about hope. Second of all, we're teaching you to create a story that you're going to deliver again and again. Do you really want to deliver again and again that story of the worst moment in your life? I mean, I know a guy, his daughter was murdered. He told that story now to over 1,000 audiences. You got to be a lot stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life. I have no idea how he does that. And third, this is where people get angry with me. I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I believe that there's something admirable about that as my goal. I also think that these people that tell these sad stories again and again, by the 20th time they're doing it, now those are crocodile tears.
Uh-huh.
They're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's a very effective sales strategy. But I, for one, don't want to have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. I think there's a better way to do things. That's why a lot of the research I follow, and this is the book that your group should be reading, is Robert Cialdini's Influence. What I love about Cialdini, he's one of the few researchers I've ever read who's very ethical. He says if it's not a win-win, you cannot do it. And it really guides everything that I'm trying to teach people how to do. How can you ethically get people to jump on your boat and enjoy the ride together? You shouldn't
Right.
have to use fear as a tactic or use sadness as a tactic. It's a tactic. And again, I'm not saying it's not effective. It's, look at, again, political commercials. They like to do the fear, not the hope. I think that we're all better than that. I'd rather us
Yeah.
focus on the hope.
Well, I love the five C. I love the five C's, and again, just to recap that, clarity. Who is your audience? What is the problem? Connection. So talk about your failures. What I'm hearing here is talk about your failures. Weave in your story. You're really good at weaving in the story too, right? But don't be overly dramatic and don't make it the saddest part of your story and make it like don't I guess to be blunt, don't depress yourself through telling the story over and over again. Content and I think different people, especially myself included, like I'm so focused on wanting to give good content, but maybe sometimes I'm too focused on that and I'm missing some of the other ones because of it. Because I think not only you're saying it's the least important, but the problem is most people think it's the most important. That's probably the confusion is that if there's five of them, you're saying it's fifth most important, but it's really sorry, yours. But a lot of people think it's the most important thing. And then call to action, I like that. Please, by the way, leave us a review. I would really, really appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying that, Danny. And last,
I'll
close with
leave
something.
you.
I appreciate that. And then close with something inspiring. So, really good. And I want to, one thing you mentioned that I just want to hit on briefly is you talked about just the importance of your network connection coaching. Who's been inspirational? Who's coached you? Like, where have you gotten that from personally?
No, I've been blessed. I've had lots of wonderful mentors. People always ask me, what do you have to do to become a better speaker? I say, well, two things. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. And second of all, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups, which means you got to do the work. So I
Yeah.
had Jim was a mentor. I was blessed to have Zig Ziglar as a mentor, a wonderful speaker. My parents, my most important mentors. My dad's the thoughtful, research-based guy. My mom's the one that never shuts up, which you can tell I never shut up. So I've been blessed. I've been surrounded by, and then a lot of the people that I'm not going to give names because we have some agreements that we won't, but we worked with some pretty big people that they've impressed me. I'll give you one guy. I'll just give you his first. He's fantastic. We worked with him. So this is actually 2 years ago in January. Gustavo. Gustavo should be president of the United States, Phil. I mean, Gustavo. He came to America 30 years ago from Ecuador. Didn't speak a word of English. worked every menial job on the planet, invested every dime in real estate. 30 years later, he's worth like $40 million. And so we're working with him. And so Gustavo's offer is he has a 4-month coaching program for real estate agents for $40,000. That's a big ask. I mean, that's
That's
a
a big
big ask.
ask.
I've done a lot of offers. That's probably about the most expensive offer I've ever seen anybody do. But I told Gustavo exactly what I just told you. I'm like, hey, you got to do your reps. You got to go on. Even the smallest towns in America have an Optimist Club, a Lions Club, a Rotary Club. They got schools, they got churches, synagogues, Chamber of Commerce. You got to get on stages. And he said, well, I'm going on a podcast tonight. I'm like, all right, here's my phone number, Gustavo. You call me up tomorrow. I want to hear how it went. You got to do it. He calls me up the next day, Phil. He's so excited. He's like, oh my gosh, Danny, you are a genius. I'm like, did you go on the podcast? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you make the offer? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you sell any? He's like, 23. Phil, reading is my specialty, not math. If I'm doing my math correctly, he
23.
made $920,000 that night on an offer we had crafted that afternoon. Since then, 2 years later, he's made 8 figures off of this speech that he keeps on delivering. And the reason I tell the story, I'm just so proud of him. He did the work. I'll
Yeah.
give you a better story of a guy that's not as impressed. So Jason, 3 years ago, worked with Jason, and I told Jason exactly what I told Gustavo. And Jason whined, I don't know any, I can't stand Debbie Downers. And so I said, hey, do you have a Facebook account? He's like, yeah. I'm like, you're going on Facebook Live right now. Do it. And so I was watching him. He goes on Facebook Live and he does the presentation that we've created. And some woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally got on and watched him. And guess what? He sucked. Well, I made him do it the next day. He did it again. He had 3 people watch him this time, and he sucked. But he didn't suck as bad as he did the day before. Jason has gone online on Facebook Live every single day since then. And now, 3 years later, he has 6,000 people in his community, and he made almost 7 figures last year. And again, the reason I tell that's, your results may vary, but the reason I'm so proud of him is he did the work. I
Yeah.
mean, I use poetry
Consistency.
all the time with my students. James Albury has one of my favorite poems, which is, um, he basked beneath the moon, he dined beneath the sun, he lived a life of going to do and died with nothing done. And I'm like, that's right. Most people talk. Most
Right.
people never do a dang thing. I don't want to be around those. As a matter of fact, I try to separate myself away from those people. I want to be around
Yeah.
people that are motivated. That's why I love your audience. So
Yeah.
again, sorry, that's a very long answer.
No, I like it though, and honestly, you've hit on so many different things throughout the episode. I mean, first of all, you talked about like mission and vision a little bit, and like just getting clear on that, and working on your elevator pitch for that, and honestly, what you say, but also getting clear, like that's a thing where I think we're telling ourselves that over and over again. If you go back to like the worst, most dramatic story, no, don't tell yourself that over and over again. Tell yourself what is your mission, what is your vision, why are you doing what you're doing. I think that's important. Clearly, education, reading a huge part of what you do. You talked about coaching, the importance of that. And then for me, courage and consistency. And you gave a couple of examples there. And then within that, if you're serving people, whether you call it sales or service, I like just taking the approach of being a servant and serving others. And if you use this approach though, you can have more impact with that service. I mean, that's why this stuff is important. Like if you're really passionate about what you're doing and you get good at conveying your message, which is what we're talking about here, you're going to have more of an impact. You're going to touch more lives, whether that's from a faith perspective or whatever it might be, business, right, with your kids, all those different areas. You're going to be more impactful with what you're doing by crafting your story. So I really appreciate it. I want to ask you, like, um, if you step back and reflect, Danny, just you've been on a lot of different stages. You've read a lot of different books. How does what you do? How does it make you feel?
I love it. I love what I do. I don't understand why people are. First of all, you're better than AI. That was the most incredible summary ever. I was like, wow, that's great. You just made me sound great. No, I love what I do. I don't know. I have no plans of ever retiring. I love speaking. I love writing. Now, there's plenty of things I don't like doing. And so here's a strategy for everybody in your audience. The things you don't like doing, outsource them. Have somebody else do them. I don't like getting speaking engagements. And so I hire booking assistants that they make all the contacts for that. I don't like, Jimmy is so good with clients and schmoozing them and all that. I just don't like doing that. I'm like, no, I'm interested in how do I make your speech better? What's the little way? I mean, and it's little tweaks sometimes. I told you I like adding humor to presentations. So I was working with this Indian engineer from Silicon Valley, and engineers are kind of introverted. And he's like, Danny, please, give me something funny to get people to like me. And so
I'm a recovering engineer, Danny, so be
all
careful
right.
with what you say here.
Well, you know it. So he has a very long name. I'm not going to give his real name, but it's like Shabunahar Makadabisha. And so now he starts his presentation. He's like, "Hello, I'm Shabunakar Makadabisha. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly." And what it does is it gets people to chuckle. We're not making you a stand-up comedian. What we're trying to do is to get people to make you. They need to connect with you somehow. One of my little ninja strategies is I don't like to brag about anything I've done. So what I do is I've written my introduction, which somebody else reads aloud. So like you at the beginning talking about my accomplishments, it's great. You're totally edifying me. You're making me sound like Jesus Christ. And so then when I walk on stage, I'm like, yeah, Jesus Christ forgot to wear his dress socks. So now people are like, oh, he's up here. Oh, but he's just like me. I mean, when I use political examples, it has nothing to do with politics, but President Reagan, I always thought was masterful. Here's a millionaire who lives in Bel Air, but he was able to convince construction workers in Detroit, Michigan that, man, I can have a beer with that guy. He's just like me. That's really powerful. You'll see this with the best people connecting is they can make themselves accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the connect. I mean, just the ability to connect with people again, whether if you're serving them and if you can create that connection, that's what we're really talking about here too. I think that can be so impactful. So Danny, this has been great. I want to wrap it up here, but again, so many different takeaways. I really appreciate you coming on. I have a bunch of notes here, things I want to go back through and implement myself. So I really appreciate it. How can people find out more about you, Danny?
Well, as a thank you to you, Phil, and your audience for having to listen to me, I wanted to give everybody their own blueprint on how they can create the 5 C's in their speech. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, again, freestoryguide.com, we give you a complimentary blueprint, which will help take you through the 5 C's that I just talked about. And again, I just wanted to thank you, Phil, for having me on today. Keep on doing all that you're doing. We need a lot more of your energy in the world. Keep it up.
Well, and the other thing I took notes there, Danny. You only gave us one actionable item, one actionable thing to do. So go to freestoryguide.com, check it out. Danny, I really appreciate it. You're practicing what you're preaching. For the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast, signing off. Thank you for listening to the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Muller Real Estate, visit our website at www.mullerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.